Hello, my name is Bryce Johnson. I'm a member of the Operational Innovation Team here at Methodist Health System, and today we're going to talk about continuous improvement. This is module one of three to talk about both continuous improvement and lean and some of the tools, tactics, techniques that we can all use to become better people and better at improving our workplaces. So coming up in this lesson, first thing is what is CI? And then also what is lean? We're going to go into the history of it, kind of the background, and then later, we're going to talk about some of the specific tools and techniques that we're going to use in order to really understand these two things. So, what is continuous improvement? Really, we need to start about what it isn't. So it is not a headcount reduction program. This is not a way for people to reduce the number of people working. This is not do more with less. This is a way to improve work and provide additional value to patients and to our customers. It's not manufacturing focused. We're going to talk a little bit in the history that a lot of it comes from manufacturing, but it's not always that way. So what it is, it's a way of constantly evaluating and improving processes. We're going to talk a little bit about processes later in this lesson. Basically, they're everywhere. Methods to remove waste from an organization, and then this is not a flavor of the month. This is not something that you do for a month, for 6 weeks, for 6 months, and then you go do something else. This is a culture. This is something that becomes ingrained in the organization, and then it's just part of what you do. Each new person that joins the organization understands that I should always be on the lookout for something new and interesting to do. How can I make my work better and for the patient and for the staff? And it's a lot about changing mindsets and behaviors. So we're going to talk about that later on change management, but these are really important things that you need to think about with continuous improvement. So here's a history. Yes, there are a lot of lines and a lot of circles, but we're going to touch on a few points here. First one is that continuous improvement really started with Henry Ford back in 1915. Henry Ford, as you might remember with the Model T, created the assembly line. And so it was a very different way of manufacturing cars. Previously, the car would be in one spot and all the manufacturing would come to it. But then Henry Ford developed the assembly line where the car would go through the line and then be complete at the end of the line. So Henry Ford started it. Well, Toyota came by, they watched, they learned, and then they improved upon it. So starting after World War II is really where the Toyota production system came about. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later. But lean is typically associated directly with the Toyota production system. And you might hear those two interchanged pretty easily. As you can see at the top of the screen, there's also something called DMAIC and the Six Sigma. That was Jack Welch and GE in the 80s and 90s. And Six Sigma is more focused on deficit reduction versus waste reduction. Don't you worry. We will talk about that later. So as you can see, all of these different things have separated out into a lot of the continuous improvement mindsets and understandings that we've had in the last 20 years. So why do we need to do this in healthcare? You know, we're not producing robots, we're not building things. Why do we need to do this? Well, one is that we need to make sure that our customers are still getting value and that they're having good experiences. There's also a lot about patient safety. Talking about deficit reduction, we also need to think about that with patients. How can we reduce wrong medication being given, errors made in the operating room, even errors made at the patient's bedside? Also reducing those inefficiencies and non-standard workflows. As you are probably aware right now, with inflation and other pressures, we want to make sure that we are doing things the most efficient way possible so we can focus on providing care to patients. Also, costs are continuing to go up. They're not throwing more money at the health system. So this is a way for us to continue to provide value to patients without having to charge more or work with less staff or anything like that. So 3 main reasons: no waiting, no waste, zero harm. We really want to focus on zero harm, where patients coming into the hospital, they should be coming in and getting better, not leaving worse. And also, nobody likes to wait. You don't like to wait at the grocery store, you don't like to wait at the DMV, nobody likes to wait at the doctor's office either. So we can use continuous improvement to reduce some of that wait. I mean, we also need to talk about some healthcare mishaps. Here are the top 2 that I kind of want to briefly mention as we move on with the rest of the discussion. So the first one is Josie King. She was an 18-month-old that received second-degree burns over most of her body after falling into a hot bathtub. She was treated at Johns Hopkins University and was being told that she'd be released pretty soon. She was doing well. Well, then Josie tragically passed away due to dehydration. And Johns Hopkins, they did a really deep dive and tried to do a root cause analysis, and there were a lot of errors made in her care. A lot of times, frankly, it should have been caught, and it wasn't. So they really made some changes, and there's even an organization named after her, really focused on healthcare safety. The second one actually hits a lot closer to home. This happened at Methodist Hospital in the early 2000s. I believe it was 2001. And this case is actually briefed at every single Methodist Hospital new employee orientation. Basically, he came into the ED with a really bad chest pain. His mother realized that both his dad and his father-in-law had both died or had this same case. The ED doctors, they sent him home, said that he just had a lung infection, and then he tragically died a few days later. So they have changed their checklists and processes in order to improve noticing these things, even in patients that you wouldn't typically expect that to happen to, particularly a healthy 19-year-old. So how can we address all of these things at once? It's a big load. We're talking about how can we reduce waste? How can we lower costs? How can we do all of these things? Well, continuous improvement can do that for us. One, we're focusing on what actually provides the healthcare delivery. What is the value to the patient? We remove all those wasteful and non-productive activities, and then we really allow patients, doctors, providers, nurses to focus on their main job, where they're not running around getting tools and equipment. They're able to focus on what they're supposed to be doing. And we also use data throughout to guide decision making. Continuous improvement understands that the first time you try something, it might not work, but your job is to follow the data, make adjustments as possible, and then move on from there. So collectively, we can reduce costs, we can improve the quality of care, and then we can improve employee satisfaction. Because ultimately, we want to make sure that our employees are happy with what we're doing here, because they're the ones who are going to be providing that high level of care. So, got a lot of different tools. I've listed them here that we're going to talk about, and there's a lot of root cause analysis and problem solving that we won't get into during this course. But if you're really interested, make sure to sign up for the Greenbelt course that's being offered by the college. That is the first step towards becoming a professional continuous improver. So let's talk about lean. Lean was adopted from the Toyota production system. So Toyota didn't actually start out making cars. They were a loom business. So they made cloth using their looms. And throughout that time using looms, they were always focused on how can we make the process better, more efficient, and less wasteful. So as they transitioned from looms to cars, they took that same mindset. And as I mentioned earlier, Toyota production system and lean are sometimes used interchangeably, particularly in manufacturing. But Toyota really started and made it what it is today. In fact, you'll have a lot of lean leaders that spend some part of their career with Toyota so they can learn from the masters at lean and continuous improvement. So we should probably define what a process is. A process is a series of actions that produce something or leads to a particular result. So I like to think of it as, what is my process to get out the door to go to work? Well, I need to get ready for work. I need to get my kids to childcare. I also need to make myself breakfast and let the dogs out. And each one of those steps has multiple subsets that I want to do in a particular order. And sure, I could change around the order, but there is a more efficient way of doing things. So it probably doesn't make sense for me to get my kids out the door, childcare, then come back home and make breakfast. There's a certain process that we want to follow. And that is something that, as you think about it, you have a lot of processes both in your work and your personal life. So what are the goals of lean? Increase customer value. We want to make sure that the customer receives the value that they're supposed to do. Eliminate waste. We're talking a lot about waste, and I promise you in the next lesson, we're going to really dive into the 8 different types. And then we want to show respect for people, because everybody, employees, patients, and anybody else we interact with deserves our respect. And that's one of the goals of lean. And what does it result in? As I said, like a better work environment, reduce expenses, and then people are just going to enjoy the product better. because ultimately we want the employees to enjoy working as well. And if they're not wasting their time on non-value activities, they're going to enjoy their work more. Because I'm sure nurses, providers, frontline staff, they don't become that so they can run around and get paperwork. They come that because they want to interact with patients, because they want to get them better. And that's what lean does. So that's it. That's the end of module 1. As I said, we're going to talk about more and better details as we continue down into the coursework. Hello, my name is Bryce Johnson, back with you for module number 2. Again, I'm a member of the Operational Innovation team here at Methodist Health System, and today we're going to talk about waste, value added versus non-value added work. So this is really the crust of Lean Six Sigma, and we're going to spend a lot of time talking about it, because as you understand these concepts, you'll see them everywhere. This is both the blessing and the curse of knowing this work, is that you can see what is going on and you will know how to fix it, or at least recognize it. So let's talk about waste. This is an acronym we like to use in continuous improvement called downtime. And these are the 8 different types of waste that you could see at work, at home, at other places that you're around. So let's kind of go through each one in turn and really talk about it, because this is super important. So the first one is deficits. And this is the time that is spent fixing something that was done wrong, or spending a lot of time trying to correct errors. So think of every time somebody has to review some paperwork to make sure that everything was filled out correctly, or you have to have a second person check something before you move it on to the next step. These are all deficits that you need to pay attention to before it goes out the door. It's that extra time spent. Overproduction. I just think about when you go to McDonald's and you see a giant stack of fries, and you know that there's 2 people in line. So some of those fries are going to wait for a little while. And that's when you produce too much of one thing because you're anticipating it. Maybe you need it, maybe you don't, but there's a lot of waste there, both because you're overproducing, and by the time you use it, it might be expired, it might not be quite as good, and or maybe you never use it at all, and so you really overproduced. Waiting, I feel like this one's pretty self-explanatory. Every minute spent in a waiting room or spent in a room that you're not doing something value added or seeing a provider or filling out paperwork is waste. Not engaged employees, so this one is a little bit squishier, but basically making sure that you're using your employees, you're talking to them, you're getting their experiences, because even the youngest employee might have value that they can add, and you want to make sure they're engaged so they stay with you. As we're in this great resignation, as I record this briefing, we want to make sure that we are really listening to our employees and show that they are truly the value. Transportation. So transportation is between locations. So think about a blood sample that has to go from Women's Hospital to 84th Street. Going from point A to point B, typically in a vehicle or car, that type of thing. Inventory, this is storing extra inventory. It's kind of close to overproduction. Overproduction is what you produce. Inventory is what you have on hand. So think about if you have a closet full of ink for your printer. Like, some of that might expire because you don't need to have all of that ink at that one time. That is inventory, because you're always concerned about both storage waste, because you have to have a place to store it, and it spoiling and going to waste. Motion. So this is within a smaller area. So at another health system, I had to get some dental work done. And every time they needed a new tool, the dental tech had to either call out for somebody in another room to bring the tool in, or he had to leave himself to go back and forth. So instead of having the tools close at hand, there was motion that he had or she had to complete in order to get that. So that's motion waste. So think transportation, big system, motion waste, like smaller area, but constant movement in order to grab things. And then extra processing. This is additional work that somebody has to do. So maybe a form has to get signed by 3 people instead of 2. Maybe a document has to go all the way up 4 levels instead of just 1. So every time somebody else has to touch something before it's completed, and that person doesn't really either change the product or provide value, that is extra processing. So we just talked about 8 waste, and you can come back to the slide to review it because this is a lot of information. How do we discover what the wastes are? What's happening in our workplace? Well, we use the term called going to the Gemba. The Gemba is Japanese for the real or actual place. As we talked about in the last module with the Toyota production system, Toyota's really the one that both popularized it and set it up. With the Gemba, you want to do 3 things. You want to go see, ask why, and show respect. The first thing with any Gemba visit is this is not an inspection. This is not in time to look to see if there's trash on the ground or if employees are following procedures or if they're in the correct uniform. This is an opportunity to see how the things actually occur. Another example they like to give from Toyota is you want to be actually watching the line, not talking to somebody giving a briefing. So if somebody's briefing you, but you're not actually watching the work, you're not going to the Gemba, you're getting a VIP tour. So go see what to look for. You need to look for how things are actually done. How are people actually, acting at the bedside? Are they following a checklist? Are they not? If there is a checklist, are they doing all the steps or are they skipping some? As I said, what not to look for, this is not an inspection. So unless somebody is doing something unsafe, then you need to have corrections. Otherwise, you're not going to make corrections like that. That is not the time and place. Note it, come back to it later, but this is not the time and place for that in the Gemba. You need to ask why. So asking people as they're doing the work, what they're doing and what they're trying to accomplish will provide a lot of value. We used to use the term having curiosity. So you want to be curious about what the patients are, what everybody is doing, and have a very humble view to it because you're just trying to learn what your employees are doing and why they're doing it. And if they can't complete something the way it's supposed to be, ask why. Maybe they don't have enough supplies. Maybe the supplies are too far down the hallway and it takes too much time to do it. By asking why somebody can't complete something, you'll get some really good ideas of how processes can be fixed and what waste can be eliminated. And then show respect. Every team member is valued. This is to the newest EVS team member to the VP. You want to make sure that you show respect to everybody as you go to the Gemba. If you come into the Gemba from a humble position, you'll be able to learn a lot. Going to the Gemba also varies depending on your position. So if you're a frontline leader, you should be going to the Gemba multiple times a week. A VP might do a few times a quarter. It totally depends. As long as you're not impeding the work, then you're going to the Gemba enough. All right, so this is a scene from Crotch, the movie about McDonald's. And we're gonna just go in, or correction, it's a scene from the movie The Founders on how McDonald's came to be. And you're gonna see how they use lean in their processes in order to really improve what they were doing and make McDonald's what it is today. All right, so there was a lot going on there, but it showed how you can use continuous improvement to test. So they did trial runs before they built their kitchen, and they were able to really distill it down to what were the value added activities and what were the non-value added activities. And the fun thing about that is besides whatever it cost to pay their employees, that was free. They didn't need to rebuild the kitchen 4 different times and pull stuff out and pull it in. They were able to do a test run and go from there. So let's talk about value added and non-value added activities. value-added activities are the things that customers want and they're willing to pay for. It's typically considered that something changes. The customer could want certain things and that's what they're going to pay for, or they don't want other things. Your goal is to reduce the non-value add activities to as minimal as possible. And you also want it done right the first time. It is not a value add activity if you have to do it again because it's done incorrectly. So like in that last scene, if your cheeseburger comes out as a hamburger, then that was not a value add activity because they're going to have to make the burger again. Non-value add activities. These are process steps that take time, resources, or space, but don't add anything that a customer wants. Non-value add activities sometimes can be mandatory. So there could be certain regulations that require you to do certain activities that maybe a customer won't pay for, but you're still required to do. Those things you can't really deal with. But there are other non-value activities, looking back at the 8 different types of waste that you can reduce and really focus on the customer experience. And you have to think about the patient's perspective when defining value. So we got an exercise. This is a typical clinic visit. Patient comes into the clinic and then what goes on. And you'll have the different times, as you can see, the times on the right of each one of these steps. Doing some back of the envelope math that was already done. It's about 155 minutes from the time that the patient got to the clinic, and that doesn't even include drive time, parking, walking in the clinic, figuring out what clinic they're going to, going up the elevator, like anything like that. This is just a very big breakdown from the time that they walk into the clinic. The question is, what is the value added time? I'll give you a few seconds to review what is on here and figure out what is actually value added and what is not. All right, that should be at least enough time. So what are the value-added activities? First one, the nurse. So talking to the nurse, getting your initial questions answered. Typically vitals will occur during this time. So value added. But as you notice, the first 40 minutes were not value added. Maybe the first information, but the question is, could that information been done beforehand? We don't know. Okay, seeing the doctor, this is the vast majority of every single appointment. That's what we want to get done. Okay, filling out information, yeah, maybe that information, particularly if it's at a pharmacy, a place you hadn't been there before, so they need your insurance information, like that is value added, so your medication can be paid for. And then paying for the prescription. So of all this 155 minutes of time, at most 45 minutes is value added. And both of the 10-minute blocks for filling out information could be debated. So just looking at that, you can see how much waste is within this process. And we showed the different types of waste, where we've got transportation waste. You got to drive to the pharmacy to pick up the medication. You've got a lot of wait, and then also some other non-value add activities of filling out this information. What does the clinic already have, and what is new that they're providing? So standard work. Standard work is let's get that definition. Agreed upon set of work procedures and best practices to document the interactions of people, materials, and machines. I came from an aviation background and we'd call them checklists. So every time you start the airplane, you'd follow the same standard work to go from airplane being fully off until engines on. It is a systematic way of developing and documenting the best methods, and it's typically developed by the workers themselves. This does not make you into an unthinking robot. This does not mean that you just follow the checklist and not think. But what it does is it expands your ability to think, of knowing that I can follow this checklist and this is the best that we know right now. But if you find a better way, it gets inputted into the standard work. The standard work goes to everybody, and then you have now improved your process. You have done that continuous improvement just by implementing standard work. And the question I asked at the bottom is, if your coworker called out sick tomorrow, could you do their job? That's the importance of having standard work that is both written down and understood. So you can fill in if somebody is sick or they're out of the office or on PTO, and people could have that understanding of what everybody's going to do. The other thing is that makes your coworkers predictable. You know what steps they're going to take at what times in order to get their job done. So I kind of started talking about all these benefits. It definitely improves safety because you know you're if you follow the checklist and the standard work, you're doing it the most and the safest way possible. We've also eliminated waste through standard work. And as you find additional waste, you improve the standard work to go for it. It's also going to reduce cost, and then it lets the workers really define their jobs. So when you're building standard work, you want to make sure that people are doing it together, that they're able to discuss what is done, see what the different techniques are, and then lay it out so everybody follows the same thing, where an employee could go into that position and you know exactly what they're going to do at exactly the time. And it's important in shift work where some day shift does the same thing that night shift does, that does the same thing as somebody that comes in on swings, and the same thing that a traveler would come in and do as well. So lean healthcare works. I've got two examples here. So the first one is from Seattle, where they increased their patient satisfaction and they've also were able to increase the visits. So they were able to help more people without increasing employees, and within that line without increasing hours. So it's not like the employees were working harder or they had to do working longer hours to do that increase. They were just simply working more efficiently. So there's less waste, there's less waiting, there's less non-value added work, and they could really focus on seeing patients. And they've also, as you see the safety thing, they were able to reduce VAP cases in 2002 from 34 down to 4. So that is both, we're keeping people out of the hospital, we're not having them stay longer, they're leaving the hospital in a better condition than they came in, and we're able to reduce costs in order to focus that cost on both the patients and the patient experience. Another example, so from Wisconsin, they focused on the patient care in their radiation oncology department, and they were able to both increase revenue, productivity, but the more important part is they reduce the time from referral to treatment by 44%. That's really critical for patients. If you know that a typical wait is 2 months in order to see a provider and we got it down to 1, that is time that you get back. That is time you're no longer worrying, and that's time you can receive care. And so all of these really important things, even the door to balloon time, where minutes count in certain healthcare situations, and going from 92 to 37 is huge. And this is not without outing staff. This is not telling people to work faster. This is simply by reducing waste and making the processes as efficient as possible. That's all they did. So in the previous lesson, I talked about how we would mention Six Sigma and Lean differences. We've spent most of our time talking about Lean, and that's primarily used within the Methodist Health System. So Lean is focused on improving process speed and eliminating the 8 waste, while Six Sigma is more focused on eliminating chronic problems and reducing variation. So if you're building a vehicle and the right passenger door is always loose, you want to reduce that variation to where the door is put together correctly the first time. And that way you spend less time dealing with deficits, you spend less time having to rework because the product comes out correctly at the same time every time. So a little difference between the two, but both are still focused on providing the highest level of value to the customer at the end of it. So this is DMAIC. Define, measure, analyze, improve, and control. There's some math involved that we can talk about, but basically you want to define what your problems are, figure out how you're going to measure them, and then reduce those errors. A lot of time is spent figuring out are people doing work differently? Is it material? And that comes with going to the Gemba and observation to figure out how to reduce that variation so the product comes out the same way, the same time, every time. All right, last slide on this one, or second to last slide. This Winston Churchill told this to the British Parliament in World War II, saying, "We are out of money, therefore we have to think." So it's easy enough to throw money at a problem, but by thinking and finding ways to eliminate non-value add activity and waste, you'll be able to do things more efficiently. And that's ultimately what we want to do using Lean and Six Sigma. Hello, my name is Bryce Johnson again, and this is Module 3 of Introduction to Continuous Improvement. Today, we're going to talk about the PDSA cycle, A3, and do some root cause analysis. This is always my favorite part because you go from observing to fixing. So, coming up, PDSA cycle, plan, do, study, adjust, problem solving, root cause analysis, and change management. So those are topics we're going to cover, and let's get into it. So PDSA, this is a problem solving cycle that you will complete as you're going through this. And it's not a one-time cycle, it is a multiple time cycle. Throughout a project or process improvement, you could be going through the PDSA cycle dozens or even hundreds of times over the course of years as you go through it. So let's break each part down in turn. Plan. So first you have to define the objective. What are you trying to change? What are you trying to improve? Asking the questions, that's when you go to the Gemba, figure out what's going on, ask your employees what's going on and figure out if there's a way to fix it, and then make predictions. You want to make predictions during the stage, both so you have a hypothesis that you can test against, and then also you'll be able to reflect later in the cycle on where you were right or where you might have been wrong in your predictions. And then you also need to make sure you know how you're going to collect data during the next step, because the data at the beginning and at the end is really going to tell you where those improvements occurred or where maybe you didn't quite achieve the improvements you were hoping for. So carry out the plan. Whatever you decided in the plan section, work on it. If it was changing one part of the process, testing that, seeing how it works, and then collect the data. So if you have a check-in process at the front desk and you change some steps, this is where you'll collect the data after the change has been made. So if it took before the change 5 minutes to get a patient checked in and then it now only takes 3, then you had a good change. And that's what the study section is for, is you're going to take that data and you're going to analyze it. Did it make improvements? Did it improve in the way that you thought it was going to? Or did an improvement come from left field? You really want to focus and reflect during this stage and figure out what you learned and what could be improved upon. And then the adjust stage is like, okay, what else can we do next? And you're going to plan that next cycle, make that adjustment, hold that adjustment, and then start looking for your next thing to improve. Kind of looking as a PDSA cycle as pushing a ball up the hill, where each step that you get there, you want to make sure that you're able to hold those changes and then continue to make improvements afterwards. So we're going to do some project planning with A3. A3 is a tool that particularly as you get more involved within continuous improvement, you're going to hear a lot about because it is really important on how we do our continuous improvement work. So what is an A3? It is a problem solving method and it's very structured. It was designed years ago and has a storyboard visualization. It is a living document. It isn't a one and done. It's something that you constantly make adjustments to, different versions of as you go through your problem solving cycle. So why is it called an A3? Well, that's actually the size of paper, 11 inches by 17 inches. So there's an A2 and A1, which are different sizes. But it was found that the A3, so 11 inches by 17, is big enough that you should be able to put the entire problem solving process within this document. You know, most people don't use the big piece of paper. You'll see a lot of Word and Excel documents. In fact, on the Methodist Health System internet page, we have copies for you to use if you want to get involved with A3 problem solving, both in Word and Excel. So we're taking that PDSA cycle and we're bringing it to the next level. We're really looking at those steps and figuring out what is next. Kind of looking at it as a funnel of where you understand something is wrong. And then as you go through these different steps, you're going to eventually get to the root cause of what is really causing the problem. And then that's where you'll start making those corrections and adjustments to fix that specific problem. Instead of being like patient wait times are really long, you'll have a very specific answer to why that is happening and what is happening. So 8 steps. Problem statement. Why do we care? What is the issue about this problem? What is the business case? Because yeah, it'd be nice to fix some problems, but you really want to make sure that there is a business case for it. How is it helping patients? Is it reducing waste? It is increasing employee satisfaction. And then what is current state? Current state is really important to both figure out how you're going to track it, what sort of data do you need to collect, And then also, what are the problems that you see right now? Because you can't compare a future state and know if anything improved if you have no idea what occurred beforehand. So then it's goals. What are we aiming for? What are those things, as we talked about in the PDSA cycle, like what are we predicting could happen? And then what is the business need for this? Is this a nice thing to have, or is there truly a patient safety or employee connection? Then you got to do some root cause analysis, which we're going to talk about in just a few minutes, on different ways to complete that process. And then, okay, you did an analysis, now you need to go into improvements. What improvements can we make to really focus on these important causes? Make that action plan. Are we going to change our standard work? Are we going to adjust our process? Are we going to move something? So if there's a lot of motion waste, we're going to move some tools into the same room in order to reduce some of that waste. And then how are we going to measure it? How do we know if it's working? I mean, sure, it'd be nice to say, well, it seems like it's working, everybody's happy, but you want to have some way to measure that, both to see that improvement go live and to celebrate it, because it is really difficult to celebrate kind of a vague improvement versus we reduced this by 20%. We decreased our wait times by 8 minutes. Like, you want to be able to have that data so you can truly celebrate what you have. And then we need to standardize it. How can we make sure that everybody is doing the same thing? That's where standard work comes in, where if you made improvement from your standard work, you update the standard work and let everybody know. Or if this is building the standard work, then you have that ready to go. Root cause analysis. So got to find the root cause. Got to figure out if it's addressed and then make sure it doesn't happen again. So there are a lot of different techniques on how to do it. Some of these are both covered in other courses. They'll be covered in the Greenbelt course as well, being offered by the college. But we're going to talk about a few of these here right now. My favorite is the 5 whys. So this is, it doesn't always have to be 5. Sometimes it's 3, sometimes it's 10. But this is a way of looking at things to really determine what the root cause of a problem is. So we've got a little example right here. Pharmacy wait times are above the goal. Why? Well, we can't fill prescriptions, enough prescriptions. Okay, why? Well, we don't have enough pharmacists. And in a typical problem-solving scenario, that might be where it stops, where it says, well, we need to hire more pharmacists and that's it. But in a lean continuous improvement environment, you keep digging, you keep looking to see what are the other ways to look at it. So next question, why? It takes too long to fill orders. Well, why does it take too long to fill orders? This is where going to the Gemba that we talked about in module 1 really becomes critical. You have to observe how the work is done in order to really understand where the problems are. Well, for this one, they discovered that there's too much walking. So the pharmacy techs are having to walk too far between different points to fill prescriptions. Well, that's not good. Well, why are they walking so much? It's a poor layout of the room. Well, why? Well, techs walk 25 feet for medication. So instead of stopping at, well, we can't fill enough prescriptions, we need to tell people to work faster, we figured out what the root cause is, which is the layout of the room. So that's when you could go back to the founders and saw how they used the tennis court to figure out how they could make the adjustments to the layout so there's less motion waste and they can really focus. So this pharmacy, for example, if they're able to adjust their layout to where their techs don't have to walk as much, they're really going to be able to see that improvement because they won't have to, they'll be able to fill more orders quicker without creating additional work because and the staff is going to be happier because they're not spending as much time walking back and forth between areas. So that's the 5 whys. A3, this is what an A3 looks like. This example is pretty consistent. You might see some differences on different forms, but this is what it looks like. You want to make sure you have your problem statement as all the things I talked about earlier. You also want to have a title, you know, who the team leader is, your location, creation date, and then also your last update, because as we talked about, A3 is a living document. So you want to make sure that you have it updated, showing when was the last time you reviewed it, last time you updated it, when were countermeasures put in, different activities. So at the end of this entire process, you have a document that shows your entire problem-solving process, your entire continuous improvement journey. And then that's something that can both, the data can be analyzed and it can also be celebrated. So here's an example of it filled out. As you can see, you go down the left side and then you go down the right side. It is really important as you're filling out an A3 that you spend a lot of time on the left side because you truly can't start doing countermeasures unless you know what the root cause is and really look into the problem. You can see in the bottom left-hand corner what a fishbone diagram is and a Petaria chart. We didn't really talk about it here, but those are other lean tools to determine what the root causes are to the problems. And then, yeah, you see they have their different action plans, and then they determine how they're going to measure their activities, and then what sort of standardizing they want to do. And as you notice, that last box is also recognize. You want to recognize the people that are involved in your problem-solving processes because they have put blood, sweat, and tears in order to make their lives better and the lives of the rest of their employees. So you really want to celebrate that as a leader. So we talked about what the A3 is and change management. Now we're going to go into change management because you truly can't fix these changes unless you get that buy-in from the group. So this is the Bridges transition module, talking about how the ending phase is we're going to end that current state. We're going to, as we're making changes, people can be kind of neutral. Some might be hostile, some might have buy-in, but people really want to see how it's going to impact them and how these new changes are going to work. Is it just a good idea that came from leadership, or is it truly going to impact their lives and make their experiences better? And that's, as you transition out of the neutral zone, then you're going to get to those new beginnings. As people see the successes, they see the wins, they see how their lives have improved, that's when they're really going to embrace that new change. But until then, they're not really going to. So this is really important to understand that people are not going against your change because they dislike you or they dislike change or they don't want to work more efficiently. It's because change is scary and change can feel weird, or particularly if you're doing something the same way for so long and somebody coming in and saying, well, we're going to do it differently. So those are all understandable, but that's why the model is so important on making sure that you get that buy-in throughout. So now we're talking about change management. Executive support is a must with any sort of change process because you want to make sure that the leaders are bought into the change, that they'll be willing to go to bat when we're making changes. And sometimes it's not going to work. Sometimes a change process won't necessarily help, or it will be maybe wait times will increase with the change. Then we have to do something else and do another change in order to get those numbers back down. So executives must be able to support the frontline staff as they're making those changes. Also, you need to engage the frontline staff. They're the ones that are going to be doing the work as you're making these changes. So they need to have buy-in. You need to make sure that they are engaged, they understand what they're doing and why. And they're also the ones that are going to have the best ideas. They're the ones that are going to understand what to do, why to do it, or put their hand up and say, have we thought about X? So make sure that that frontline staff is engaged. Go to the Gemba, go see, ask why, show respect. Any leader or anybody that wants to do continuous improvement needs to be comfortable going to the Gemba with humble inquiry, so asking questions in a humble way and listening, because that is where the learning is going to occur, is when you're actually seeing how the work is done, not just how you think it should be done from your office. You need to get on the floor. Daily management. So this is one of the other ways of doing change management, daily visual management, huddle boards where you both do problem solving and solutions visible. It also gives the frontline staff the ability to see what problems are getting worked and where the solutions are within it. All of this, you got to start small. You're not going to make some giant change that's going to reduce something by 60% or whatever else. Even the 2 health systems that we talked about earlier, those were changes over years. It wasn't just one thing that they fixed. They fixed hundreds or thousands of different things in order to make it work. So don't feel like, well, this thing didn't work. We tried one thing and it was done. No, start small and keep working. And each one of those 1% fixes is going to combine and make something truly memorable. Well, we did it. We're done. We completed the continuous improvement lean course. Thank you so much for spending your time with me. If you're interested in this, there are additional courses both at Nebraska Methodist College. If you're a Methodist employee, on the OI Operational Innovation intranet site, And then also I will talk about the Greenbelt course that is occurring as well. So there are a lot of different ways to learn. Yes, my job is entirely dealing with change management lead, but any person can be a change leader. Any person can find a way to make improvements within their own workplace, within their own experiences. And that's something that I really want to celebrate and push at the very end of this course, is that you don't have to have the certifications in order to do change management. You don't have to be a green belt, black belt, master black belt. You just have to have a willingness to learn, a skills of observation, and ability to advocate for that change. And I hope after this course, you've picked those things up and you're ready to go out and make some positive change. My name is Bryce Johnson, member of the Operational Innovation Team at Methodist Health System, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
That concludes the online education. I would like to thank all of our presenters for their experience, knowledge, and expertise. Be sure to subscribe so you're up to date with all of Nebraska Methodist College's continuing education offerings. Thank you.